This is UX equals ROI. I'm Jeremy Johnson, Vice President of Customer Experience for Project 202. At Project 202, we are experience-driven application design development. We build solutions, technology solutions across many different types of projects and many different industries and verticals. But everything we do involves customers. And so really understanding those deep customer needs is key to how Project 202 works. And you'll see some photos here of our researchers going out to offices, in-home, wherever people are. I've also worked in-house at Travelocity, GameStop, and Sabre. And if you want to get a hold of me online, Twitter, I'm at Jeremy Johnson. I'll post these slides as most of my slides on SlideShare, slideshare.com/Jeremy, and I have a website at jeremyjohnsononline.com. All right, so I wanted to start with an outrageous quote, and who better to do that than Mike Montero here. He says, "Design has as much to do with art as a lobster has to do with a carrot cake. If you truly want a career as a designer, you're going to need to speak about someone's business and organizational goals. You're going to have to learn how to analyze data. You're going to have to learn how to measure effectiveness." And that's become key, measuring effectiveness as experience kind of grows up the maturity ladder in many organizations. Another way to put it, design may enhance performance, but unless there's metrics to gauge that benefit, the difference it makes depends on conjuncture and faith. And so as a UX designer, as I'm sure many of you are, I spend some amount of time selling, evangelizing, explaining, or marketing. In fact, at one point I was actually a UX design team a team of one inside a large organization, and so there my time was broken up, and most of the time was evangelizing experience, what experience does, why my job is important, why my role is important, why one user experience person can't really support thousands of developers and multiple product sets. And so in the beginning, I was selling that concept to developers and product owners. In the middle, I started selling it to directors and VPs. Nowadays, I sell it to SVPs and CEOs. And it's really not the value of you as a person, it's the value of UX, because your value is the value of that role, of that job. But in fact, there are still many companies who feel like design is not relevant. There was a recent study that had 59% said, why is design not relevant to your company? 59% said design is not relevant for our industry. I can't imagine an industry where it's actually not relevant. Obviously, experience is the differentiator for many organizations and many roles. And I've been able to work across accountants and lawyers and farmers and you name it, especially in the workplace and enterprise side where experience is generally lacking across the board. And so, when you first start interacting with people, on the developers and product owners, they talk about, are you a threat to my job? Like, are you here to take my job? Will this slow me down, this new process, this UX stuff you're throwing in here? Is it going to slow us down? Will this sabotage what I'm trying to do here? Directors and VPs, they'll ask questions like, why should we involve users and customers? Is that important? Why should we prototype and test? And of course, when you get to SVPs and CEO, they're basically asking, hey, what's the ROI? What's the value that you're providing? And so designers, to some people, it could be more like either you're on the Frida Kahlo, the artist, or you're like Ray Eames, the architect and designer. But really, I'd like to say sometimes we're actually a little bit more like Jane Goodall, right? We're observing, we're understanding, we're bringing that understanding back to the product teams. For the guys, sometimes we're like Andy Warhol, right? Just doing wild and crazy things. Or Steve Jobs, kind of a design genius of sorts. But Neil deGrasse Tyson might actually be a better representation. Again, understanding the world around us and relaying that back to folks. For millennials, throw it in there. I kept Steve Jobs because I think he's still well known enough. But maybe you're like Kanye, the artist. Or like Steve Jobs, but really probably more like Bill Nye, the science guy. Again, bringing methods, bringing processes to the software development process. And so explorers using a scientific method, right, seeking to understand and provide context, which again is what we're doing actually quite often. And really, if you look at the scientific method, it's actually not that different than most design methods. And today, if you go to school for user experience design, these are the types of courses you'll be taking, and you'll notice a lot of these courses have to do with ethnographic research methods, user research practices, sketching and prototyping, Quantitative data metrics and analytics, right? These are things you're learning. It's not just visual design as maybe it once was many years ago. And design is everywhere. On the front of Bloomberg, on the front of Harvard Business Review, just to name a few. Gartner, mentioned that 89% of companies believe that customer experience will be their primary basis for competition, and design is a big component in that. John Maeda, for a while, was working for a venture capital fund focusing on organizations that invest in design because they're seeing a greater return from that. In fact, he does a great job of tracking mergers and acquisitions across design-related companies, and you definitely see a spike trending upward, and he gives this presentation every year at South by Southwest. This is a little dated now, but they had 43 design organizations that had been acquired since 2004. Companies want this competency in their organization. 9 out of 25 top VC-funded startups have designers as co-founders, and that's up from 5. In fact, if you look at companies, these are design-led companies, and the years it took them to achieve $1 billion in valuation, some very well-known, very popular companies, and these all had designers at the helm. They also created a design index where they actually pegged the S&P 500 versus what they called a design index, so companies that were heavily investing in design. And the design index fund beat the S&P 500 by 228%. So design has value. In fact, Forrester took another look at the data and they added laggards in there as well. And so from customer experience leaders to the S&P 500 to customer experience laggards, which unfortunately many companies are, like the gap increases. In fact, Forrester has a number of ways of kind of grading a maturity level of a customer from customer experience perspective. And I like this one because it's outdated, progressive, and modern. And it talks about the scope, right? Are these just kind of ad hoc projects, or is it end-to-end built into your solution? Is it about strategy? Is it totally absent, or is it setting the vision of where your company should go? Is it just usability testing, or is it kind of full qualitative and quantitative driving kind of hypothesis driven experiments? In fact, Google talks a lot about this as well. In fact, they have the design sprint book, which is really well known, but they go on to say investing in user research is just about the only way to consistently generate a rich stream of data about customer needs and behaviors. It talks about go out and listen to your customers. It's very important. And when you talk about the amount of money spent on software projects, so $600 billion yearly is estimated spent on digital projects, and billions of that is wasted. And kind of the top 3 reasons we see that is up to 30% are due to poor requirements definitions. So imagine having prototypes validated, right, that showcase the experience. So the requirements are built out in prototypes so the development team immediately understands the context. Projects are being scrapped or end up being underwhelming. It's because they didn't involve the users and they're not hitting the right marks what the user is looking for out of the product. Or rework, right? So you design something, maybe it's a long project, maybe it's a large enterprise project. It launches and there's a lot of rework to do afterwards. And of course, rework costs more after the fact than it does during the design phase. And so about any book you read today, so it talks about modern design practices, and it's all go out and interact with your customer, put things in front of them, understand them better, build out customer experience journey maps, right? Like they're all the modern processes say a very similar thing. But with all that, you still get that one guy, and the one guy that says, I hear you, but what's that ROI, which we get frequently. Here's another take on it. The biggest ROI a brand can have is from investments in design is a rapidly growing, loyal, and motivated customer base. And I agree with that, right? The more customers you have, the happier they are, the more they're going to spend with you in your organization. In fact, there's Net Promoter Score, which is actually a good way to kind of grade to grade that, your promoters versus your detractors. But again, still, that's not ROI. So let's talk about that. So how does UX equal ROI? So there's a group of students that put together what they call DROI, Design ROI, a while back, and I've kind of paraphrased some of that here, but what I like is there's kind of 4 ways that design could actually add value to an organization. So more revenue, additional revenue via better experiences which drive more customers and sales, kind of what we were just talking about. Reduce costs, savings via improved processes, systems, and digital transformations. Time to market, get to market with the right product and service faster and hit the mark the first time. Or new concepts, identify new concepts and revenue streams that leverage your brand in new services or products. So this is kind of that generative research. So imagine going out, observing customers, and then having ideas from that weren't even on any roadmap or any product plan. And they actually have a great way, and again, all my slides are posted, so feel free to dig a little deeper here of kind of showcasing that value. But what we see, typically, on consumer improvements, we'll see things like more downloads, higher conversion, more usage, better onboarding. And on the workplace side of things, we see great gains in efficiency and ease of use and productivity and time to task and success rate. And again, all these things attribute to increased revenue in one way or another. Typical development savings be around reducing the rework, higher Scrum team velocity. So imagine if your Agile team has validated prototypes ready to go, working with UX designers, how much faster they can be. Less documentation because the designers in that conversation are able to answer those questions. Focusing in on your innovation, right? Again, making sure that you're heading in the right direction. You're focusing on the features that truly matter to your users. Reduce time to market, even on the marketing side, again, higher NPS scores, better market perception, more customer insights, helping with your market segmentation. So a number of benefits across the board. And so as a designer, I feel like early in my career, I would just be excited if I did something. Like I did a project, like I'm really excited about that, which is great. And then, eventually you move up in the career a little more and then it becomes about the metrics. Like I did this thing and this effect happened. That was amazing, right? And then it's dollars, right? So I did this thing, it had this effect and I saved the company or I made the company, right? And then at the end it's ROI. Like what is the value of the experience that you've created? So let's talk a minute about more revenue. So these are actually public numbers online by user testing. So it's kind of a remote usability testing platform. And they talked about a couple companies that have increased via just finding some very simple usability problems. And so they had Zillow, 8% boosted conversion, StubHub, 2.6% lift in purchase rate, Bank of America increased the yield of 5-step online banking process. And these are all great. In fact, and that's just the usability side, where I would say, adding all the other research activities on top of that would even grant even a higher yield than just some of these simple changes. But that just shows you how some experiences, something small can really help. But again, building out the customer experience journey maps, building out the personas, doing concepts design, doing prioritization, doing Kano studies, contextual inquiries, right? Like these are richer research activities that'll even bring additional value. But here's that same chart, and it's funny because on the post they actually had two different ways. In this chart is, Speak 60%, Zillow 8, Bank of America 45, but there is no real context here of which one's better or worse, which I thought was funny. But we've actually worked with a competitor of StubHub before, so I wanted to use that one as an example and dig a little deeper. And so StubHub said, soon after implementing the change, StubHub realized a 2.6% increase in conversion rate, which resulted in millions of dollars in extra revenue. Today, the Go button is on every event page on StubHub's website. So again, that's a pretty good story. 2% increase, and they added in the millions of dollars. And so, which one would you rather say? Again, millions, probably for this guy here. It would sound better than 2.6 because it would be 2.6% of what. But you could even go a little deeper. So they're owned by eBay, and so eBay is a publicly traded company, and so they have an annual report. And so digging in the annual report, it says, our StubHub platform, the largest ticket marketplace in the U.S., accelerated year over year with a GMV of $3.6 billion, growing 13%, and a revenue of $725 million, up 15%. During the year, we made a number of product and experience enhancements to the StubHub platform, which we believe contributed to StubHub's strength. So what's pretty cool is in the annual report, they're attributing all the growth in their marketplace and in their revenue to experience enhancements, right? So right there, they're saying the user experience improved. We did things to improve our user experience, right? And that's where this gain came from. And so here are two bigger numbers. So the marketplace, 3.6 million, and the revenue, 725 million. And so you could take this phrase and you could change it, right? Because, they're online only. If it's a 2.6 increase to the market, that's an additional $93 million in market. Or if it's 2.6 increase in revenue, it's additional $18 million. So you don't even need to say millions as in two, maybe, right? And it's actually 18, which is huge. So you could say Through proper usability testing and user experience practices, we were able to identify key issues and with some minor improvements increase the GMV by $93 million over a single year. Now that's a great story to tell. ROI speaks for itself. And so with the cost of the changes, you could actually come up with the ROI as well. So this was actually, again, a very small change. They basically changed a link to a more identifiable button. That's actually where the 2.6 came from, which had a huge effect on their online business, which online's 100% of their business. And so imagine you had a team of 3 working on that. Maybe they make $80K a year. That's $240K. If they worked on this project 5% of their year, maybe it's $12,000. And obviously, if it cost anywhere from $12,000 to really $1 million, the ROI would still be huge. But it's probably a small team that investigated and then made these changes. And so, like, the ROI could be up to 150,000% ROI, which actually sounds kind of insane. And I think if you told someone this, they would probably do a double take and not believe you, and you'd really have to go through the math. But you see this story, or this type of story, come up actually quite often. So Jared Spool, well-known UX designer, talks about the $300 million button. So the results, the number of customers purchasing went up by 45%. The extra purchases resulted in an extra $15 million for the first month. For the first year, the site saw an additional $300 million. And this is a story about allowing guest checkout. It was a big box retailer, didn't have guest checkout. Through some simple, small changes, $300 million. So you could say, through proper usability testing and user experience practices, we were able to identify key issues and with some minor improvements, increase the GMV by almost $100 million. It was 93, you could round up, over a single year with less than a 20K investment. So showing that the investment was really low and the return was really high. And again, if you said 150,000% ROI, they would want to see more of the math probably and potentially laugh you out of the room, even though it's true. So reduce costs, it's another way that design could add value. And this is really where Workplace comes in. So Human Factors International, they've been around for quite some time. They actually have a number of ROI calculators on their website. They talk about reduced reliance on help desk, increased productivity. And we found these as well. We do work in the call center space and the workplace and enterprise space quite often. And sometimes some fairly small changes in some cases, or through more deep understanding, some larger changes can really help reduce costs, increase efficiency, and then overall increase customer experience. So here's one example that they had on their site, and this is all public on their website, talking about reducing support calls by 25% and talking about the number of calls. Let's say they have 5 million a year, average salary of a call center person, right? And so they have some numbers here, although the average salary seemed very low and the improvement costs seem very low as well. But let's take a company like Dell. They sell 40 million computers a year. Do you think they get 5 million calls for these 40 plus the 40 in the year before? Yeah, I bet they do. And so if you look up how much a call is, average call for a call center is around $4.50 per call. But if it's a tech support call, which these would be, it's roughly $10 per call. And so for every call cut, that's $10 save, right? So could we push people to self-support? So if you can cut out 500,000 calls, you would save $5 million. And there's another calculator online, and this is for if you're staffing up a call center, how much would it cost? And so to plug in the number of calls you would have to get per week to hit that 500 million, that's roughly $55 million yearly you're going to be paying for that call center. And so the cost to improve, being less than the return you get. So again, shaving 5 minutes off every call could save $10 million, right? And what UX designer wouldn't take up that challenge to shave 5 minutes off a customer experience call? I've seen some of the systems that customer experience folks have to work with, and usually not a lot of attention to detail was given to those systems. And this is where you could bring up cost neutral. So, hey, can I, let us spend 100,000 here, and it's going to save you 5 million, right? So there's actually no cost to you. It's a total return there. And so give me $1 million and I'll save you 10, right? That sounds like a good deal to me. And so ROI can be seen on one side where you're shaving time off every call, or on the other side where you're reducing calls to the call center. And so here a story could be, through understanding our customers' needs via observational studies, we were able to prototype, design, and launch an improved self-support tool that reduced calls to the call center by 20%. And that saved over $10 million the first year, an ROI of 833%, right? This is a story that could happen very easily. So now let's talk a minute about digital transformation. So taking things that are historically offline and moving them online. So moving your business to effective digital technologies, effective is a key word there. And so this could be as simple as going paperless. It could be moving to cloud-based tools and solutions, connecting systems across businesses that historically weren't connected, adding sensors to equipment. And all these things should equal a better experience with more efficiency and less manual processes. And actually, gov.uk has a digital services group. And what's great is it being a public group, they actually blog and really have to talk about everything that they do. And so they had a story that said how digital and technology transformation saved £1.7 billion last year. Again, big number. And so they talk about, and it's a great group, they always start with user needs, they're agile, they work on a set of design principle, they work openly. And so you can kind of backtrack and see how they get to these numbers. And they said that more than £600 million of the year's £1.7 billion saved was through the work done by this specific group that they call it the GDS group. And they talk about, spend control. They saved £391 million to build better services. They figured out smarter ways to get contracts. They talked about building prototypes instead of these really long procurement documentation. But also, they got over 98% of driving tests now booked online. 85% of self-assessment filing is done through online channels. And 12 million people registered to vote using new digital services. Right, and so that they're talking about a cost of £58 million, and then it was a saving of £600 million. And so that's 1,000% ROI. Again, another great story of how design and proper digital technologies saved quite a bit of money. And so you could say the UK government saved £600 million in 1 year at an ROI of more than 1,000% by digitally transforming a number of services to better serve its citizens across the UK. So let's talk about time to market, getting there faster and making sure it's right the first time. Again, I wanted to bring up this prototypes part. So obviously within the design methodology, prototyping, validating, iterative design, upfront design, early and often design, it's very important. There's a couple great quotes here. There's actually a book called Building Better Products, A Modern Approach to Building Successful User-Centered Products. It's a great book, but I love this quote. Let's stop just shipping features, crossing our fingers and hoping they work. Let's figure out how we could test whether we're moving in the right direction before we commit to 6 months and hundreds of $1,000s towards building something. And we still run into lots of organizations that are thinking this way. Hey, I have a big workplace project, big enterprise project. It's going to be 2 years to build. We're refactoring, we're bringing in new services. And, up until this point, they were not imagining themselves actually showing a user any part of the product until they're probably about 1.5 years into that journey, which is obviously not the right thing to do. So you should be prototyping early and often, along with generative research. There's actually a number of ways to calculate the ROI of digital prototyping as well. Here's one where finance teams recognize that most products fail at an astonishing rate. That's kind of where the fail fast or learn fast kind of came from. But there's a lot of unpredictable outcomes. So anything you can do to reduce that risk, to help make the outcome more predictable is going to be a benefit to the whole organization. Developing a product without user research essentially is one expensive experiment, which according to the aforementioned industry benchmarks has a 90% chance of not paying off, at least without modifications post-launch, which are more expensive. Remember that this is from Marty Kagan, who's well known in the product owner space. So as a product owner, remember that our higher order objective is to validate our ideas the fastest, cheapest way possible. Actually building and launching a product idea is generally the slowest idea and the most expensive way to validate an idea, which I wholly agree with. And talks about, why by the time you try 20 things, you have a 60% chance of success. By the time you try 50 things, you have a 92% chance of success. And fail you will, right? So you should learn from those. And you'd rather that failing be done upfront during that design process than later on after it's developed and launched. And there's a cost of change as well. This shows you, from idea to wireframes to designs all the way up to code. And it talks about, again, like the more you try things, the more you experiment, like the better chance you're going to have of a positive outcome. And we find that as well. So, we have our embedded kind of collaborative teams. And so we always make sure UX design is embedded with the development team. So they're kind of working together as a single team. And we've actually pegged our teams versus internal and even offshore teams. And we've seen a great improvement from having the design specs up front, understanding the user, having prototypes, having proper UX design embedded in proper ratios with the development team, we've actually seen quite a bit more velocity out of development teams. There's the old 1, 10, 100. So from every dollar invested in UX, you save $10 in fixing issues during development and $100 if the product has already been released, right? So imagine your development team, imagine the design team changing some iterative prototypes in a validation session in a lab versus when it's been written in code versus when it's been written in code and launched, right? Each of those are going to have a dramatic increase in size of cost by time. And then let's talk about new concepts, how design can actually just generate new concepts that, again, you weren't even thinking of, you weren't even aware of, you didn't even know your customers had these problems. So these could be whole new revenue streams. And I want to take one kind of non-digital example. So Daisy Sour Cream, I'm in Dallas, they're in Dallas as well. They actually contracted with a group to go out and do in-home studies of people eating. The Daisy is known for their great sour cream. You can get it in pretty much any grocery store. And so they had researchers go out and sit with people at dinner time. And what they found out was that traditionally, comes in kind of the jar with the spoon, but people were having issues with single service. So there didn't seem to be a great way to pass it around. There didn't seem to be a great way to kind of put the appropriate amount on your dish, the amount that you would want on there. And so that was a problem that they found by just going out and observing. And so from that, they started actually prototyping different types of ways to use sour cream in different containers. And so this is great, right? So generative research, they're doing rapid kind of product prototyping. And then they're able to come up with a final solution and then launch that solution into the marketplace. And they put on their site, in a short time, had been in the market, the Daisy Squeeze ranks among the top 10 sour cream items in sales. In a recent customer survey, 60% of Daisy Squeeze users said they would recommend the product to a friend, 20% more than the average. So again, another great story. And so I would have some deeper questions if I was working with them directly. So, did it cannibalize or increase sales? Like, that's important to know. What was the increase to sales? What was the revenue? Did it increase the overall share of the market, right? So there are some more questions I'd like to dig into, but overall, a successful story. And so if I was going to create a story around this, it might be something like Daisy increased, whatever, we need to track down that metric, that's important, by using observational studies in people's homes during dinner times and rapid prototyping to innovate a new product that met the needs of modern consumers, which is a really great story for any company. So why are observations so powerful? So I've mentioned generative research quite often. I've mentioned kind of going out and observing and shadowing, and why do we feel like that's so powerful? In fact, I have a couple talks on this. I could spend probably 45 minutes specifically talking about that. But many well-known companies have stories about how they involve users and customers, and so it's not just us saying it, it's just me saying it. Like you can go behind the scenes of many of these companies and read stories about how they're using research, design research, observational techniques to build out their product pipeline, to validate the value of the thing that they're creating, and to prioritize what it is that they're building. And I kind of showed this chart before, but for us, an idea funnel, obviously there could be brainstorming with your team, and that's a source of ideas, just as could be simple surveys and other techniques. But to really go deep and to really understand customers, again, customer experience journey maps, in-person contextual inquiries, workflow diagrams, personas, service blueprints, concept designs, usability testing or validation testing, as we do more often, prioritization, Kano studies, right? These are all ways to validate and feed an idea pipeline. The average lifespan of a company is listed in the S&P 500 of leading UX companies has decreased by more than 50 years. They say companies today last just 15 years, right? And when you think of the speed of innovation, you really have to make sure you're adding value and you're continuing to add value to your brand and looking out for what your customers need, because they could quickly move in a different direction. So just a note about disruption in surveys, because I mentioned surveys being kind of a normal way to sometimes track this. I love this. This is from 2011. So 2011, kind of put yourself in that perspective. BlackBerry is also well positioned for future growth. 24% of customers claim that their next handset will be a BlackBerry, well above the 3% of Apple's iPhone, right? This was 2011. And then I want to point out the word claim, right? Because it's a survey, right? So they can the people are poor predictors of the future, and sometimes they kind of put an aspirational view of themselves, and they can't really understand market disruption well. Now if you look at, so they were 11% of the market at that time, where they said iPhone was at 3. And of course, this needs to be updated because the most recent story is BlackBerry is officially at 0% of the market, the same as the Windows Phone. So customer claim, right? So that's something that observations, being there in person, not only can you hear what they have to say, but you can actually view their world and understand their world better so that you can get a better, kind of more holistic 360 view of those customers. Here's a great one. The Envision blog posts some great articles. People in everyday life don't really know what they need. They just tell you what they think they want. People don't always do what they say, and they rarely know how they'll act in the future, which we found to be true as well. People will give you an aspirational view of themselves. People are poor at predicting their future behavior. Some behaviors are just purely subconscious. Again, observing people. Why did you just do that? Oh, I didn't even realize I was doing that. I've done it so often. People are swayed from moment to moment by unexpected influences, and people want to fit in, which is a problem with things like focus groups. In fact, if anyone's seen the Jimmy Kimmel, I think he calls it lie news, where he'll go up to groups of people and he'll say some outrageous news thing, and then they immediately agree, claim they heard it, and then give a commentary on the outrageous news story, because again, they don't want to feel left out or like they didn't know something. And there's actually a great article on Forrester recently about building real customer understanding. It says how to avoid research pitfalls and achieve insight instead. And insight's the key word there. Right? You really want to achieve great insights, going to equal great experience enhancements, which is going to equal more business value. And they talk about all the different ways that people are using research today. And things like diary studies are here all the way at the bottom, which are things we do quite often. Or things like customer interviews, right? Or market research. So there's many different ways that they're using that, and many of the more richer insight gathering ways are kind of at the bottom. And Forrester is saying that they're not going deep enough. If you're only doing surveys, that's definitely not deep enough to increase your customer experience. Here were some of the methods that they were talking about going to. So ethnographic field studies. In fact, some of our researchers have anthropology backgrounds. Contextual inquiries, diary studies, right? These are things that we do most often when trying to gain that deep insight. Our CEO likes to put it, it's kind of a continuum in a way, right? So how well do you know your customers? You can go to any organization and say, are you customer experience focused? Are you customer focused? Of course, they're going to say yes, because no one wants to say no to that. But when you start to ping them, like, really, well, how deep, how aware are you of their needs? And do you have definitive personas that are backed by research? Have you been out recently and seen any changes in the marketplace? Are you effectively taking that information and then moving it into your product pipeline? And many organizations, again, maybe they're just doing a customer council, maybe they're doing the occasional survey, right? That's not enough in today's environment. So Project 202, we've spent a bit of time with this and a bit of time of talking about ROI. A lot of our clients, again, interacting with a lot of SVPs and C-levels, they will ask that question, like, how did you, Project 202, as a kind of a design-led software technology company, right? What kind of ROI did you get from following this type of process? And so here's an example of one. So a successful launch in the flight operations space. So Project 202 partnered with the relaunch of a critical flight operations system, and during a beta saw up to a 15% improvement in on-time performance. And this was during irregular flight operation time. And so that's a great metric. We help redesign a product, right? The product launched, and you're able to see the effect. And this is great because it's kind of on the workplace side. So these are the folks that know where the planes are and which ones are late and where things are delayed. And not only does it improve them organizationally, which actually helps reduce a number of costs, including actually airlines are actually penalized for some of these delays. It increases the customer experience for us, the flyers. And so a lot of our stories kind of are built like this. So it's you kind of hit with ROI first, talk about the scale of the problem solved. So in this case, there are 40,000 employees and 3,000 daily flights, and then go into the project details. And so this is a great way to build that story that I've been talking about to really showcase to people who are asking more about ROI. And this is one where you could have went deeper than we originally went. In fact, Kevin Green, who's our digital transformation officer, this is all public information. So what's the per minute cost of a delayed flight for an airline? $65. What's the average length of a flight delay? 57 minutes. What percentage of flights are delayed daily? 21%. What's the full cost of the delay per flight? $3,729, right? So you can actually, the cost of delays totally could be in somewhere in the ballpark of $3 million. And that's just using publicly identifiable information. 500K a day. That sounds like a ROI win to me. And so we do this across different projects. So every time we're with the project, and we prefer to be with a project until it launches, and because we have research, design, and development, we can do that. And so this was a case where we helped double revenues by increasing conversion by 54%. And this is an organization that has $5 billion in sales and over 100,000 events a year. We helped rethink a control experience and to reduce the setup time by 90% and reduce store returns to 1%. We helped a retailer launch a loyalty program, and now they have 1.5 million loyalty customers in just over 6 months. So these are all great stories, and it's really just digging a little deeper, taking stock of the numbers you have and creating a story around it so that when you showcase back to more business-minded folks, you can tell that story. We also do a lot of design systems. So design systems are kind of where you take a company, maybe they've acquired 3 or 4 companies over some number of years. They want it to be a suite of products. Visually, they don't look super consistent. You're not using the same UI patterns across there. So you want to create a system of common components that you can share across all those systems to kind of bring it together. And so this is kind of a sticker sheet of what one might look like. And what's great is with these design systems are not only can they be helpful for the design and product team, but you could actually productionize them as well. So the development team, when going to write code, can actually put dot button, and there is the one button instead of many sites that have up to 25 different buttons, or 25 different grids, or 25 different ways to say the same thing. And our director of user experience here in Dallas, Heath Stallings, actually went through and again creating kind of a business case for what that could potentially do. So if your organization has 100 devs, right, and it saves 5 hours of work per week because they're not having to recreate the wheel every time, that could be up to $1 million in savings. So not only are the products going to get better, you're going to do better in the marketplace because they look better and they're easier to use. Not only are more people going to buy more parts of your suite, in that case, but you're actually having a cost savings as well, and the developers get more opportunity to build in more features that truly matter to those customers. Yeah, talking about annual savings combined, right, or 21% of a developer's time. There's actually a really good story from Intuit that I heard at the Enterprise UX conference where they actually built out a design library but actually had them componentized. So they actually used the same login system for Mint and QuickBook and other products in their suite. And they mentioned that they had a 52% reduction in calls due to account recovery, which would have been a roughly $560K in support costs. So they've reduced the support cost by $560K. And again, a very small change. It was all about password. So I forgot my password and the whole password recovery process. They made that way easier. They solidified the best experience. They pushed it out to multiple apps, right? And that's what they saw from that. So again, going back, it's more revenue, it's a reduced cost, it's time to market, it's new concepts. Like these are all things that design can do for you. So 5 last things to remember when talking about ROI. So dig deeper. As I showed in that airline example, you could dig really deep. Like there's always numbers there. You'll sometimes ask product owners, you'll sometimes ask teams, and maybe they don't know the numbers. Maybe they're not mature enough to be tracking those yet. But somewhere there's always a number, and it's in your benefit as a user experience designer to track those numbers so that you have those rich stories to tell. Investment versus cost. So remember, in most cases, we're making the money, right? So we're not a cost center, we're actually an investment. So as an investment in experience, right, you're going to get this return. From I did this to results, right? So it's not about finishing a feature or finishing a product. It's about what the results were. What was the outcome from that feature, from that product? Cost neutral. Sometimes the cost is zero. If our team spends, $100,000, $500,000, and it saves you $5 million a year, you should do that all day long, every day. And if you can't measure it, again, there are teams who seem like they have a hard time measuring things. But there's always a measurement there somewhere. So again, we just saw measurements on saving time with call center on the workplace side, improving conversion. But you saw the list of metrics at the beginning that generally design will improve. Somewhere there is a metric to measure, so make sure you find that. And so next time your boss asks you, why should I keep you around? You just need to say, because I'm the one that prints the money. Because we are. All right, thank you very much. Again, I already mentioned, I post all my decks online. So jeremyjohnsononline.com will have all my decks as well as on SlideShare. And from Project 202, we actually have a book on our site. It's experience.project202.com to get directly to the book download, where we actually talk about our design process and how we can infuse large-scale software technology challenges with design to help make sure we have a better outcome and we do get that ROI we're looking for. All right, thank you very much.